I do believe that will work. And I'm going to talk about several things here today regarding arrows. I am going to fletch one, and hopefully I can pass along some handy tips to, let me adjust this, there we go, to help you avoid the pitfalls of fletching. There are a lot of tricks involved in it, and actually quite a few different methods. I have, as you've seen before in both these, my standard method is I have a long, and this is actually two sections of sinew from an elk, leg tendons, which are a lot longer than whitetail. And I had to tie a knot. There is a knot right there. I would suggest if you're getting into fletching and you're going to do, you start from the front and then do a spiral wrap, feeding it through the feathers. I would strongly suggest maybe going to eBay and buying a backstrap tendon, because in the case of American bison, or we call them buffalo, they're pretty long, and it makes it amazingly easy. Just backstrap. You don't even need to pound them with a hammer. I have a comb that I made, little tiny sharp nails inserted into a block, and you just comb them out, and then maybe picture that this is your backstrap, a sharp edge on a countertop, and then just pull it over that edge. It cleans them all off. And so it's a very easy process. They're pricier than leg tendons, but it's well worth it. Long story short, I just tied. I made a thread, and the thinner the better, because it doesn't separate, I should know the parts of a feather, it doesn't separate the feathery parts as much. And so when you wind up fletching, the thinner it is, the better chance you have of having it look like this and not having like gaps in there. What else? Now, these are both fletched spirally. You might ask, well, can't you just glue them on there? Well, you know, commercial ones are glued in a jig, but a lot of the primitive arrows were also glued with a pitch glue, or else just bound in the front, glue applied, and then bound at the back. Handy tip number 1000 in the scheme of handy tips is that if you were to soak these in hot water, for one, if you find feathers on the ground, sometimes they're kind of gummy and messed up, that hot water will rejuvenate them, so they will again look beautiful like this. Another thing about hot water is it'll soften, and they'll kind of stretch out a little bit, so when you bind them at the front and the back, when they dry, they'll shrink and then go down against the shaft. Now, funny thing is, hide glue is water soluble. Perhaps instead of, like I did this, I crested it. Suppose you size this with hide glue and you put a damp feather on there. Well, that damp feather is going to wind up gluing itself there, so when it shrinks and sticks down, voila. Spelled with a V, voila. I'm trying to think of some handy tips here. I am not going to, oh man, I forgot to put the notch for the air, or for the string on this. I always do that first, so I don't risk messing up the feathers. But you know what? Pretend I put that notch in there. I'm just going to go ahead and fletch it and put the notch in after the feathers are on. Why not? I've got stuff to do, and you can just picture that it's already there. Now you're wondering, just like if you're doing a footed shaft, which the main shaft will have a chisel point, and then it's inserted into a foreshaft of another material, and you'd say, that's witchcraft. How do you do that with stone tools? Make a fish mouth, a tight V on here. That trick, as I stated before, is the foreshaft is made from a split, and you work it down to about the same diameter as this because it'll work easier. You apply a sinew wrap at the end of where you want that fish mouth joint to be. You split the wood again right down the center, and you just jam it in there, and it'll separate it. It'll open it up, so the main shaft will fit into this fish-mounted joint that was actually a split that widened. The sinew will keep it from splitting all the way to the end. When the glue is dry, you can remove that sinew and then work the foreshaft down so it looks like a trick. Where was I? I forgot. I was talking about tricks. Oh, pitch. I've been involved in a text conversation with a fellow in Florida regarding pitch glue. And it relates very much so to pitching the shafts on there. 3 components. Ground, very finely ground charcoal. Very finely ground, so it's even and you don't have like charcoal lumps in there. A pitch. And I actually, you don't want to use runny pitch. It'll take forever, it'll be sticky, it'll be nasty. You can just go to where there were scars on a conifer and break those off, and that is what you're going to use. When you heat them, they'll liquefy. And you mix the charcoal, and you mix a little bit of fat, or wax. Beeswax works too. And he was asking about the ratio and how to keep it from getting sticky ad infinitum. And the thing is that the difference in pitch between a fir tree and a spruce tree is slightly different. And so I can't give you the ratio. You just have to work it out. You take your pitch, you put it in like a tuna can or something, or a rock if you want to, an impression in the rock. Heat it up, liquefy it, add an amount of charcoal, and I'm not going to give any ratio here, and a tiny bit of fat. Stir it up, take some out on the stick, let it cool, ball it up, and judge. You don't want it to be sticky, you don't want it to be brittle. In the case of glue, if you add a fat or a wax, it's not going to reduce the stickiness. It'll still be sticky. And so a glue, it gives it flexibility if there's some fat or wax in there. But the specific ratio, trial and error, my friends. It's a witchcraft. Trial and error. Now, I am going to tell you that I would look at these and I could not tell that this is real pitch. Aha! I don't know where my pitch ball is. I've got a pitch ball somewhere. It's buried in the midst of a lot of different stuff. And so I thought I would give you an example of what you can do in your apartment, in your house, if you don't or can't, don't want to, don't have time. You want to make a mock pitch. This is also a 3-ingredient. And it's simply Titebond, black acrylic paint, and flour. And you just whip it into a dough. It acts exactly like the pitch. Exactly. You can't tell the difference between my 3-ingredient mock pitch and the real pitch type of stuff. And it dries in a way, instead of just cooling. You can't tell the difference. This is mock pitch on here. I always felt that you need to know the basics, how to work with the natural materials and work with a minimum of tools, including down to stone tools. And once you master that, you know, if you want to do like shortcut jobs like this that look like authentic stuff, that's fine. Same thing with cresting. You notice the cresting here, black, white, with a little bit of space. It's a little artistry. This is blue, which blue is highly prized in North America with the natives because it's rare. I know how to, and I have worked with ground natural pigments mixed with hide glue and used as paint. But in this case, I used acrylic. I know how to do the authentic stuff, the 100% organic, native way. And so I do not feel amiss unless somebody asks me to have a 100% authentic arrow. I'll go this way. If you take it and you water them down, they'll make more of a washy kind of paint, uneven, and that looks authentic, because authentic paints in many cases are kind of a washy, kind of an odd thing. I'm going to be right back. Hang on. Make your tea, make your bag instant coffee. I'll be right back. Sorry, cat. Okay, I'm back. Now, fletching. I have this tool, and you don't need it, and it was, as you saw before, to hold the feathers in place. And I did a rough sanding of them when they were full length. I do the fine tuning when they're cut, because I want to have kind of a specific thickness in the part of the vein, part of the feather that lays against the wood. I trim them so I do have a coherent flat spot on the back, on the skinny end, on the end, because I don't want it to be able to twist on the arrows. You need to have a footprint there. I trim mine to 6 inches because I'm going to reduce the length of this feathery part when I trim them to lay on the arrow. Now when you're using this, there's a handy tip. You want to have perpendicular. You want it to be like right angles. Good catch, John. And so there's a way. When this is gripping, it's all set in there. Suppose that this foot, let's just call that flat spot the foot. Suppose it's angled this way on the feather. You want to get it back at perpendicular. What I do is when I'm sanding, I don't do it straight sideways because it'll injure the feather possibly, but when I'm sanding it front and back, from the front to the back, I'll have it this way. If it's higher on this side, you always have it toward the higher side. Okay, several ways to bind these. I mentioned before, soak them in hot water. I don't need to because I'm doing a spiral wrap. But if you're just doing a front and a back, you do not need to trim the feathery part away from this. I don't need to have a cut going down here so there's just a blank area. I actually have a benefit by pulling on this area, and then the sinew will wrap around it. So in some cases you see arrows that have this part just pointing back. And you can trim it off if it makes it hard to like fit the string in, but a lot of times you'll see arrows that just have that part of the feather hanging out. I am going to trim that, both front and back. Now on the front, I just take it, boom, 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 and I want to get like a little greater than a half an inch. That looks good. And this is my key. I'm going to take the next one, I'm going to judge it, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to pull it, I'm going to hold it up to the key. No, too much, just right. Number 2 is good. I'm going to use the first one, because I don't want to have a running error, a statistical type of thing. And I'm going to do number 3. That was a stubborn one. I want to have everything as even as possible. There we go. Good enough. Darn right perfect. Test that one again. Good. Now the back end, once it's on the arrow, I can always go back and trim it a little bit more. So I'm just going to kind of guesstimate. Guesstimation is your friend. Pretty good. Pretty good. And a few notes. Each feather varies slightly on this angle. And conceivably, if you're doing a set of 6 arrows, you want to have all the feathers on all 6 arrows at the same angle. At least have the 3 on each arrow at the same angle, or it's going to look stupid. It will look stupid. So make sure that if you're not going to trim it, in the case of this arrow, and I'm going to explain the point on it at the end, I'm not going to trim them at all. I'm going to have more of a spiral, more of a flu, because you probably have never seen this before. You've all seen these. Look at that, a stone point, and hopefully you can see this. See the difference there? Is that this one has notches on the side. This just has like a basil notch, I think that's the term. And so it's not being held on by anything. And that is why it's important to have either the pitch or the mock pitch on there to help glue it into the shaft. And again, I think I said this yesterday, is that the pitch serves two purposes. It waterproofs or bloodproofs that sinew on the end. It also cushions where that stone point fits into the shaft and keeps it from breaking. Stone points, you've seen that? You've seen just having like a sharp point, which works well with small game. Look at that. The original judo point, kind of a cage effect. This is a good small game kind of a head where they're killed by concussion rather than bleeding out or having, say, their lungs collapse. This is good. This is the original judo point. I made sets of ishi arrows for people. I'd make the arrows, a set of arrows, in other tribal areas, quiver, and then a bow, all a match set. And in some cases, the tribes used these original judo points, cage heads, as it were. And these I got just from trimming the ends of the arrows, so you know it's free material. And I'm not going to even go into it. They are held on there with sinew and hide glue. Now I'm not going to pitch the end of this. It's always good to have pitch on stuff. I'm going to just put grease on it, and that'll be enough. I didn't mention though, I don't think I've mentioned before, another way to put these on is that you actually will glue them or wrap the sinew around them. They're on, look at how screwy this looks. But when you take that, you bind them with sinew, and then you fold them over, you get normal looking fletching, and again, you just tug on that feather and then wrap it with sinew, and off you go. If they're not glued to the shaft, they will still work. That doesn't matter. That's a matter of aesthetics and not functionality. So let us get started. I usually work on the ground, so I am on the ground, and I want to, because these things are going to fly over my hand, I want to make them as smooth as possible, and to make them as smooth as possible, hopefully you can see how thin that is. Beautiful job, John. But there is the slightest of edge on those things. So instead of thinning it on the bottom, taking my sandpaper and sanding it down here, I like this right here, that flat edge. All I'm going to do is just knock at an angle, knock that down so it just comes to like a chisel point, nice smooth chisel point. That's going to help it glide over my hand better without the hurt factor, the pain factor. And to some extent, the sinew can, when it shrinks, really crush those down and make that insignificant. That's not from the dust, that's from talking too much. Oh, a note on the arrow contest in my Flat Earth video. What I'm going to do is I've got all three of these are going to go to people that contributed to an amazing degree. So I'm going to give away cover to shipping on all three of these arrows. I said we were going to vote on one, on person that wins. I'm going to continue that. I want to, make a plan and then go with it. And so we will vote on them. Not as many people watch it videos I thought. Usually when you have a Flat Earth video, like everyone and their brother comes in. But the other two, I'm going to be the decider. I've heard that before. Okay, on to it. I've got, let's see here. This, which is plenty long, so I'm going to stick the front of the feathers on initially with that same thin strand that I'm using for the spiral wrap. Normally, I only cut myself off two for one for the front and one for the back too. And so I'm not going to use that yet. If I had a third one, I would use the third binding sinew to just stick these on here with the ability, not a full wrap on the front, to rotate it to adjust it. So since I didn't prepare enough here and I've got plenty of length here, I'm going to use this. I don't suggest chewing on these things. It's theoretically possible that you could get a disease. As they say, I'm too old to die young, so whatever. Soften this out. Now, a tool that I use to help, when you're doing the spiral wrap around here, you have to have a consistent angle for each of the wraps as they're going progressively towards the tip, the back end. And did I say even? Yeah, because if they're not even, it's going to like make the feather lay weird. It's going to slide up and then kind of crush that. So I would use, if I had it handy, an awl, and I would see where it wants to go, stick the awl through there, and then run it up. Because the angle, it can become somewhat deceptive of where you should actually slice through the feather. Since I don't have my tip thing on here, it doesn't matter how I lay it as long as these things are even. Just start it. You know, a good way to do it would be to slide it under one. Slide it under one to catch it, do a wrap, add the second feather, do a wrap, add the third feather, but let's just be bold. Let's be daring. There we go. I'm just going to hold this, and if I had my notch, if I was actually planning ahead, I would be able to orient these. So I've got a cock feather, the one that's outside, and I would have that notch oriented with these things, but chances are, wow, yeah, one of them does match. If I look at my cage this way and this way, one of them does match. Close enough. Well, I'll slide it. I like to have even. Okay, now we're going to start doing the spiral. Get that all. That needs to go forward a little bit. Get the ends all perfectly lined up. Alright, now it's time to start going around. I am not going to wet this spot with that knot because sinew is really slippery when it's wet. That knot would slide out. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slice it through there. I started with my finger, my awl finger. Nope, too much of an angle. And I'm looking through here to maintain an even angle, and I'm also pushing with my thumbnail as I do this. Not enough of an angle. This is where the awl comes in handy. But a thumbnail works. Especially if you go all Howard Hughes. Good angle. Okay, push that. And I can adjust the helix, that's a good word, when I get this all done. Sometimes it helps to do kind of an initial trimming on the height of the feathers because they're kind of feathery on the edge. But because this is a small game arrow, it's got that judo point. I'm going to leave them, I'm not going to trim them. They're going to be a highly spiraled flu-flu. A flu-flu. Nope, not enough angle. I need to sharpen my thumbnail. There we go. And I'm not matching the number of spirals I'm doing on these because this is not a set. It is a set, but it's not going to remain a set. So each one can be different. There was some question I had about Spine by Senor Philip King. Do I spine my arrows? A lot of that is no. Short answer. You get a feeling of diameter. You get a feeling of how length affects it. You get like all these feelings. Also balance. You know, making a nice set of arrows requires an eye towards maintaining proportionality. I don't want to call out any names, but there was a gentleman in Texas that told me that they comments quite often. Good guy. We've been acquaintances for a while. Mentioned that the price of hardwood shafts has gone up, and the first letter in his first name is A. Hopefully you know who I'm talking about. For some reason, your comments do not show up on my videos. I don't know what the deal is. I've done that before, the trick where you make a comment and then you delete them, and the person you're directing them to can see it, but then nobody else can because the comment no longer exists. I wonder if that's the trick. That's why I'm not saying your name. But I'm not being like a snob or ignoring you on purpose. It's just that I don't have a comment to respond to. Wow, I'm making these things so tight I might run out of length. It's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. I might have to redo this, but I'm not going to redo it during this video. I'm just going to like go all the way until it ends. Then I'm just going to secure it under the vein. I made my tights a little too tight, or my wraps. Oh, come on. Come on, buddy, you can do it. And I'm not mad. The face I'm making is because I don't have glasses. They broke. Oops, gotta go out a little bit. At this point you want to be careful because you don't want to make the feathers slide, so as you get it through there, get the thing down and then you tug on it. Sweet, it's gonna work. Made it to the end. Then I'm just gonna do a couple wraps and then just kind of lay it underneath. The veins. And I do not have my full wrap, so before I finish this up, I still have some length. I want to make sure that that is a flu. Looking good. And I'll work with it to get these things touching again. You can see that has a highly engineered, what would you say, helix curve around there, and I can fiddle with these to get those touching back, and there we are. Now the hard part is done. It's time to, this is a little bigger than this one. This will be on the end where the string goes. This is going to be on the front. And when you're doing the front one, unlike the very small fine thread that I use to put the spiral. It helps for smoothness to have a little bit wider. But right now, what I'm looking at is the width between these things. And they should be even. And with the spiral, because there's no glue involved, I am able to slide, sticking my nail in there, and I can push it this way and this way, each individual feather, so I can see the strip. And that is a guide too, not only looking this way, but looking at this, nice and even. They look really good. Got lucky. If perchance I don't have an even spiral and I do get separations in the feathers that are not going to come back, see, those are coming back. I did a pretty good job. If I get separations in there, it's a visual thing, not a functional thing, so don't worry. I actually should take this and then put it in hide glue, or put hide glue in my mouth when I'm chewing. What your enzymes in your saliva, your spit, will cause this to like self-glue, and then I will take hide glue. I'll heat it up. I got some in there. Got hide glue everywhere. I've got to adjust this little thing. There we go. Utter perfection. I'll put a wash over this, and I'll take it, put it on my pinky. You could use a paintbrush, and then wipe it down along here so it'll glue the feathers down. You could also test your arrow before you put that hide glue along here and glue your feathers down so you can still adjust them. I had a question regarding arrows that flew funny. Now, if you notice, they have varying degrees, but every arrow I make has a spiral, either minor or major, rights and lefts. I do not do straight fletching. Fletching, it just runs straight. Because you run the risk, unless it's perfect, that is when you'll have an arrow that flies funny. If you attempt to do straight and it doesn't work out exactly right. So now I'm just gonna, do you start up at the feather and work towards the front, or do you start at the front and work towards the feather? Guess what? It doesn't matter. It's just personal preference. Then I'm not going to do it in any way that will cause this to like twist. And so I am going to flatten it with my fingers as I spin